It's funny how quickly life can change. One moment, everything feels so ordinary, mundane, even, and then something happens that flips your world upside down. For me, it started on a Tuesday. Just another boring Tuesday in my little suburban house at the end of Maple Street. The morning was unremarkable. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. I remember hearing the faint hum of the refrigerator as I poured myself a cup of coffee. My dog, Max, lay sprawled out by the kitchen table, his tail thumping lazily against the tiles whenever I moved. Outside, birds chirped noisily, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower droned on. It was peaceful, normal. I had just finished breakfast when I heard it, the first sign that something wasn't right. First, I thought it was nothing. Probably just the wind rattling the windows, or maybe the pipes groaning like they always do this time of year. But then it came again. A low, guttural sound, almost like breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. Except it wasn't coming from anywhere near me. It sounded closer to the living room. I froze, gripping the edge of the counter tightly. "Max?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. He didn't stir. His ears didn't perk up, not even a twitch. Whatever it was, he couldn't hear it, or worse, he chose to ignore it. That thought sent a shiver crawling down my spine. Slowly, I made my way toward the living room, each step creaking underfoot. The noise grew louder with every second, until it felt like it was right behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out all other sounds except that awful, wet inhale and exhale rhythm. When I finally reached the doorway, I stopped dead in my tracks. Nothing looked out of place. The furniture was exactly where it should be. The TV remote sat untouched on the coffee table. Even the curtains hung still, unmoving despite the open window. Everything seemed perfectly normal, except for the fact that the sound was now deafening. It filled the entire room, reverberating off the walls like some unseen beast was trapped inside them. And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The noise wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster, trying to pinpoint its source. The breathing grew heavier, more deliberate, as if whatever was making it knew I was listening. My hands trembled as I traced the outline of the wall with my fingertips. There was no logical explanation for what I was hearing. No animal could fit in there, no person either. And yet, a sharp knock echoed through the house, jolting me backward. Came from upstairs. 3 loud, deliberate raps like someone demanding entry. Except we lived alone. Just me and Max. No visitors. No one else. My legs felt like jelly as I turned toward the staircase. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to grab Max and run, but I couldn't move. Something about those knocks felt familiar, like they weren't meant to scare me but to warn me. Warn me of what? I didn't know. All I knew was that the noise from the walls had stopped. For now. But as I stood there, staring at the darkened steps leading to the second floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was waiting for me upstairs already knew I was coming. The staircase loomed ahead of me, each step bathed in shadows that seemed darker than they should have been. The air felt heavier here, pressing down on my chest like an invisible weight. I tried to steady my breathing, but it came out shallow and uneven. My mind raced with questions. Was someone upstairs? Was it a prank? Or was I losing my grip on reality? I forced myself to take the first step, then another, each creak echoing louder than the last. The knocks hadn't repeated themselves, but the silence was somehow worse. It stretched thin, brittle, as if waiting for something to shatter it. Max stayed downstairs, his whining faintly audible from below. He hadn't followed me, which only deepened the pit of dread in my stomach. Dogs are supposed to sense danger, aren't they? So why did he stay behind? When I reached the landing, I paused, scanning the hallway. Nothing moved. The door to my bedroom stood slightly ajar, just as I'd left it earlier. Across the hall, the bathroom light flickered faintly, though I was certain I'd turned it off before coming downstairs. Something about that flickering bulb made my skin crawl. It wasn't natural. It pulsed too slowly, almost rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Then I heard it again. A whisper. It was so soft at first that I thought I imagined it. Just a faint murmur drifting through the air, barely distinguishable from the hum of the house settling around me. But as I stood frozen in the hallway, it grew clearer. Words began to form, fragmented and disjointed, yet unmistakably human. "Help us!" My breath hitched. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound brave. There was no response, only the echo of my own words bouncing back at me. Then, quieter this time, almost pleading, "Can't leave." The voice wasn't coming from any specific direction. It surrounded me, seeping into the walls themselves. I spun around, searching for its source, but the hallway remained empty. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything except those haunting whispers. They were everywhere, and nowhere. I backed away instinctively, retreating toward the stairs, but stopped when I noticed something strange. The wallpaper near the bathroom door had shifted, or rather, it looked like it was moving. Tiny ripples ran across its surface, as though something beneath it was trying to push its way out. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the movement persisted. Without thinking, I reached out to touch it. The moment my fingers brushed the wall, a sharp jolt shot up my arm, forcing me to yank my hand back. The whispers erupted into a cacophony, overlapping voices screaming incoherently now. Their tone changed, no longer pleading but angry, desperate, accusing. "You let us in." The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. Let them in? What did that even mean? I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the carpet. As I scrambled to get up, the lights overhead flickered violently, plunging the hallway into near darkness. When they stabilized a moment later, the bathroom door swung open on its own. Inside, the mirror above the sink caught my eye. At first glance, it seemed normal, reflecting the dim glow of the flickering bulb. But as I stared at it, a shadow passed behind me. Not mine. It lingered just outside the frame, hunched and grotesque, its shape shifting unnaturally. My reflection didn't react. It simply stared straight ahead, wide-eyed and pale, while the shadow crept closer. And then it spoke. "Don't look away." I whipped around, heart hammering, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway stretching behind me. When I turned back to the mirror, the shadow was gone. But scrawled across the glass in jagged letters, written backwards so they could only be read in the reflection, were 3 chilling words. "It's in the walls." Before I could process what I'd seen, the floor beneath me trembled. A low rumble reverberated through the house, growing louder until it drowned out all other sounds. The walls groaned, and I swore I heard scratching, hundreds of tiny claws scraping against wood and plaster. It was coming from everywhere, everywhere except outside. Whatever was happening, it wasn't external anymore. It was inside the walls, inside the house, maybe even inside me. As the tremors subsided, I realized one thing with terrifying clarity. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The message on the mirror burned itself into my mind. "It's in the walls." Those 4 words looped endlessly, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I couldn't stay in that hallway any longer. My legs carried me downstairs almost involuntarily, each step feeling heavier than the last. The house seemed alive now, breathing, watching, waiting. Every creak of the floorboards felt deliberate, like it was mocking me. When I reached the living room, Max was still lying by the kitchen table, but he wasn't relaxed anymore. His ears were pinned back, his tail tucked tightly between his legs. He whimpered softly as I approached, refusing to meet my gaze. "It's okay, boy," I murmured, though the words sounded hollow even to me. How could anything be okay when I didn't even understand what was happening? I grabbed my phone from the counter, scrolling through contacts with shaking hands. Who could I call? The police would think I was crazy. Friends? Family? No one would believe this unless they saw it for themselves, and I wasn't sure I wanted anyone else here. Not with whatever it was lurking just out of sight. That's when I noticed something strange about the walls. They weren't just making noises anymore. They were changing. Subtle cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. It reminded me of static electricity, except it pulsed in time with the whispers that had followed me downstairs. Each pulse sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I pressed my ear against the wall again. This time, the breathing was louder, more erratic. Mixed in with it were other sounds: scratching, scraping, and something wet slithering behind the plaster. Whatever was inside wasn't content to stay hidden anymore. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. For a moment there was silence. Then came the answer. Not in words, but in images flashing violently in my mind. A dark void filled with writhing shapes, eyes staring out from the shadows, hands clawing at the edges of reality, desperate to break free. I stumbled backward, clutching my head as the visions overwhelmed me. When they finally subsided, I collapsed onto the couch, gasping for air. But the worst part wasn't the visions, it was the realization that I recognized them. Deep down, buried beneath layers of denial, I knew those eyes. I'd seen them before, in dreams, in reflections, in moments when I thought no one was watching. And suddenly, pieces began falling into place. Years ago, I'd made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. One I'd tried so hard to forget. But forgetting doesn't erase guilt. Guilt festers. It grows. And maybe, just maybe, it manifests. The thought chilled me to the bone. Was this some kind of punishment? Had my past caught up with me in the most horrifying way possible? Or was I losing my mind entirely? Determined to find answers, I grabbed a flashlight and a hammer from the utility closet. If the truth was hiding in the walls, then I'd tear them apart if I had to. As I raised the hammer above my head, Max let out a low growl, his hackles rising. For a second, I hesitated. What if breaking the wall released something worse? Something I couldn't fight? But curiosity, or perhaps desperation, won out. With a grunt, I swung the hammer down, shattering a section of drywall near the baseboard. Dust billowed into the air, choking me momentarily. When it cleared, I froze. Behind the wall was nothing solid. No insulation, no studs, just empty space and movement. Shadows shifted within the void, twisting and writhing like living smoke. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Some begged for help, others screamed in agony. All of them directed their attention toward me. "You shouldn't have done that." The voice came from directly behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. Still, the presence lingered, an oppressive weight pressing down on me, suffocating. I dropped the hammer, backing away until my back hit the opposite wall. The shadows spilled out of the hole I'd created, pooling onto the floor like liquid darkness. They spread quickly, consuming everything in their path. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please, Max barked sharply, snapping me out of my panic. He stood protectively in front of me, snarling at the encroaching shadows. For a brief moment, they hesitated, recoiling slightly as if afraid of him. But then they surged forward again, swallowing him whole. "Max!" I screamed, lunging after him, but it was too late. The shadows engulfed him completely, leaving only silence in their wake. I fell to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. My best friend, my only companion, was gone, taken by something I couldn't comprehend. As grief gave way to anger, I picked up the hammer again. If these things wanted a fight, they'd get one. I swung wildly at the spreading darkness, shouting curses and threats. But the shadows absorbed every blow, growing larger and darker with each strike. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I collapsed to the ground. That's when I noticed something new. Amidst the chaos, a single figure emerged from the shadows. It was humanoid, but barely. Its limbs stretched impossibly long, ending in razor-sharp claws. Its face, if you could call it that, was featureless except for a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth. It tilted its head, studying me with an expression that might have been curiosity or hunger. "You let us in," it rasped, echoing the earlier accusation. "Now we won't leave." Before I could respond, the creature lunged. I rolled aside just in time, narrowly avoiding its grasp. Adrenaline surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, grabbing anything I could use as a weapon. A lamp, a chair leg, anything to keep it at bay. But the thing was relentless. Every attack brought it closer, its claws slicing through furniture like paper. The house groaned and shook around us, the walls bleeding black ichor that pooled on the floor. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, making it hard to breathe. In a final act of desperation, I hurled the lamp at the creature, striking it square in the chest. It staggered backward, letting out an ear-splitting shriek. For a moment, it seemed vulnerable. That's when I saw it, the source of the noise. Nestled deep within its chest was a pulsating orb of light, throbbing in sync with the whispers. If I could destroy that, summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I charged forward, driving the broken end of the chair leg straight into the orb. The creature convulsed, letting out a deafening roar as the light exploded outward. The force of the blast threw me across the room, slamming me into the wall. When I opened my eyes, the house was eerily quiet. The shadows were gone. The creature was gone. Everything was still, except for one thing. From somewhere deep within the walls, a faint scratching began anew. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just coming from one wall anymore. It was everywhere. Above me, below me, surrounding me. The house itself seemed to be closing in, its structure groaning under the weight of whatever force had taken root within it. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the remnants of the chair leg like a lifeline. My hands trembled, slick with sweat and blood from where the splintered wood had cut into my palms. But there was no time to think about pain. Not now. The silence that followed the explosion of light was shattered by a sound so unnatural it made my stomach churn. A wet, gurgling noise, like something being dragged through muck, came from the hole I'd smashed in the wall earlier. Peering inside, I saw movement. Not shadows this time, but something solid, something alive. And then it emerged. It wasn't the same creature as before. This thing was smaller, more humanoid, but infinitely more grotesque. Its skin, if you could call it that, was translucent, revealing pulsating veins and organs beneath. Its eyes were black voids, devoid of any humanity, and its mouth stretched impossibly wide, filled with rows of jagged teeth that clicked together rhythmically. It crawled out of the wall on all fours, leaving trails of dark ichor in its wake. "You shouldn't have done that," it hissed, echoing the earlier accusation. Its voice was layered, overlapping with countless others, each one dripping with malice. "You've only made it worse." "Made what worse?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the strain. "What do you want from me?" It tilted its head, studying me with an expression that might have been curiosity or amusement. "We're not what you should fear," it said slowly, enunciating every word as if savoring them. "We're just messengers." Before I could process what it meant, the floor beneath me shuddered violently. Cracks spread outward from the hole in the wall, spiderwebbing across the entire room. The house groaned again, louder this time, and chunks of plaster began raining down from the ceiling. Dust filled the air, choking me as I stumbled backward. The creature lunged, faster than I thought possible. I swung the chair leg wildly, catching it in the side of its misshapen head. It let out a shriek that rattled my eardrums, but it didn't stop. Instead, it grabbed my wrist with clawed fingers, its grip like iron. Pain shot up my arm as it yanked me closer, its breath hot and rancid against my face. "You don't understand," it snarled, its voice rising to a deafening pitch. "You brought us here, you fed us, and now—" Its words trailed off as the ground beneath us gave way entirely. I fell hard, landing on something soft yet unyielding. When I looked around, I realized with dawning horror that I wasn't in my house anymore. I was somewhere else. The air was thick and oppressive, heavy with the stench of decay. The walls, if they could even be called that, were made of flesh, pulsating and writhing like living tissue. Veins bulged along the surface, pumping some kind of viscous fluid that glowed faintly in the dim light. Above me, the ceiling stretched endlessly upward, disappearing into darkness. Below me, the floor squelched with every step, as though I was walking on rotting meat. And then I saw them, dozens of figures, hunched and broken, shuffled aimlessly in the distance. Their faces were obscured, their bodies twisted and deformed. Some dragged themselves forward on shattered limbs, while others clawed at the walls, leaving bloody streaks in their wake. They moaned softly, their voices blending into a chorus of despair. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the cacophony. "This is your doing," the creature replied, appearing beside me as if summoned by my thoughts. "Every lie, every secret, every sin. You buried them deep, but they festered, grew, became us." "No," I choked out, shaking my head. "That's not possible. I didn't—" "You did," it interrupted, its tone almost pitying. "And now you'll stay here, with us." As if on cue, the figures turned toward me, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their heads tilted in unison, and I realized with mounting terror that they were staring at me, staring through me. Recognition dawned in their hollow eyes, and they began to move faster, closing the distance between us. Panic surged through me, overriding every other instinct. I ran, dodging grasping hands and leaping over writhing masses of flesh. The walls shifted around me, twisting and contorting to block my path. No matter which direction I turned, the figures followed, their numbers growing with each passing second. Desperation drove me forward until I stumbled into a clearing. In the center stood a massive, pulsating orb, the same one I'd seen in the creature's chest. Except this time, it was enormous, towering above me like a malevolent sun. Its surface rippled with images, fleeting glimpses of moments I'd tried so hard to forget. Lies I'd told, people I'd hurt, choices I'd made. And at the very core of the orb I saw myself. Not the person I wanted to be, but the person I truly was. Flawed, broken, guilty. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a supernatural entity. It was a manifestation of everything I'd repressed, everything I'd refused to confront. And now it had consumed me completely. The figures surrounded me, their cold, dead hands reaching out. I screamed, thrashing wildly as they dragged me toward the orb. Closer, closer, until a blinding flash of light engulfed me, and everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my living room. The walls were intact. No cracks, no shadows, no grotesque figures crawling out of the plaster. Everything looked normal, too normal. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm golden hues across the furniture. Even the air smelled clean, free of the oppressive stench of decay that had suffocated me moments ago. But something felt off. The silence was deafening. No birds chirped outside. No distant lawnmowers droned. Not even the faint hum of the refrigerator broke the stillness. It was as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath. I stood up cautiously, my legs shaky but functional. My hands ached from where the splintered wood had cut into them, and dried blood streaked my arms. A physical reminder that what I'd experienced wasn't just a nightmare. Max was nowhere to be found, though his food bowl sat untouched on the kitchen floor. His leash hung neatly by the door, swaying slightly as if disturbed by an unseen breeze. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from upstairs. My heart sank. I wanted to believe it was just the house settling, or maybe a branch brushing against the window. But deep down, I knew better. The sound was deliberate, calculated, and it was getting louder, against every instinct screaming at me to leave, to run as far away as possible. I forced myself to climb the stairs again. Each step creaked underfoot, echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. When I reached the landing, I froze. The bathroom door was wide open, just as I'd left it earlier. Except now, the mirror was cracked, a jagged line running diagonally across its surface. And in the reflection, standing directly behind me, was the creature. Its translucent skin glistened in the dim light, veins pulsing erratically beneath the surface. Its black void eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. Its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. But it didn't move, simply stood there watching me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. There was nothing behind me except the staircase leading back downstairs. Yet when I turned back to the mirror, the creature remained, tilting its head as if amused by my confusion. "We told you," it whispered, its voice echoing not just in the mirror, but inside my skull. "You can't escape." Before I could react, the lights flickered violently, plunging the hallway into darkness. A cold wind swept through the house, carrying with it the faint scent of rot. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. And then silence. When the lights returned a moment later, the mirror was gone. In its place was a blank wall, smooth and unbroken. The bathroom itself seemed smaller somehow, the corners stretching impossibly far away. I backed out of the room, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut behind me. Downstairs, the front door beckoned. Freedom lay just beyond it. All I had to do was walk out and never look back. But as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. Something stopped me, a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, like leaving would only make things worse. That's when I noticed the noise again. It wasn't coming from inside the house this time. It was outside, faint at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder with each passing second. Scratching, scraping, breathing, heavy, labored breathing. I yanked the door open and stepped outside, expecting to see an empty street. Instead, I found myself staring at my neighbor's house, or rather, what used to be my neighbor's house. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeling and faded. A rusted "for sale" sign leaned crookedly in the overgrown yard. But the worst part was the sound emanating from within. The same sound that had started it all. Only this time it was louder, closer. As I stood there, frozen in place, a shadow passed across one of the upper windows. Then another, and another, dozens of them moving in sync, their shapes distorted and unnatural. The whispers began again, drifting toward me on the wind. "You let us in,